Now, it takes us about 6 months, give or take, to build a building. So you can see the kind of timeline we're in here. I mean, as I said, I'd like to go down to the borough and pull a permit and start construction next week. You know, that's kind of where we are.
Well, typically, you don't come to council to ask for permission to apply for a building permit. You just go to the zoning officer. But the other issues that are involved here is that this is part of a larger plan. Is that the issue here? So that we would be needing to decide whether we supported you going for permits for part of a larger project in pieces. Okay. So one of the questions that, and also the urgency for this whole matter is whether we in fact want to encourage the state store to stay here.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's the real issue.
So the two questions are, first is the borough interested in keeping the state store in the borough? And the second is, based on that, is the borough amenable to phasing the project in such a way that building permits for sections of the project would be started before the entire project is designed?
Well said.
Did I say it? Okay, good. All right. Now,
Does current zoning allow for that store to exist on that footprint? I mean, are there any restrictions that we have to concern ourselves with if Alan shows up to see Joanne Brown tomorrow morning looking for a permit to tear the building down and to build another building? What is she going to say? That's what I don't know.
oh, well, that's a good question.
But does it in fact prohibit him from doing that? I mean, she's going to say, no, you can't do it. You got to go back to you got to get an exemption from the zoning. I mean, we don't do that. No. So what's the status of the property? And you've also mentioned you've acquired the other property, Mrs. Stivia's property, right next to it. Is that zoned for what you want to do? Do we have to combine? I mean, is there work that you have to do to make this happen as opposed to someone just giving you a permit? That I don't know.
Well, the work we have to do, of course, is do the architecturals. That's the major work. But because there's a building already there, is your
my question is it zoned? It's zoned as a retail outlet to sell cars? Yes. Does that mean you can sell liquor? I don't know. I'm asking a naive question. I truly don't know the answer to it. I mean, we have a footprint there. We have a retail store there. They just sold cars, and we're now going to sell alcohol. Is that a problem? We don't have any right to stop them from doing that, I don't think.
If I understand your question is that we know that the larger area where Mr. Smith wants to build needs some zoning attention. And you're saying if he builds this particular building in this particular location at this moment in isolation, does the zoning permit it?
Does it stand on its own?
So that, right, does it currently?
Do you want to address that, Alan?
Well, my understanding is that the zoning certainly permits it. In other words, it's the right district and it's a, what do you call it, a permitted use. But I have no doubt that if I went in and applied for a permit with Ms. Brown tomorrow that I'd be turned down. I don't know why, but I'm just sure that I would be. So that might be, that might answer some of those questions.
To answer your question, Bob, I think the understanding, and Warren Waldorf for the Planning Commission is here, is that the zoning is not an obstacle. The issue is one of phasing. Is that a correct statement?
Share the podium with Mr. Smith. For all that we know based on the zoning district and the documentation, that a freestanding retail / office / commercial structure can be built on that site. The issue is the fact that Mr. Smith is definitely going to have to see the zoning officer, and I would recommend that he doesn't say, good morning, I'd like to pull a building permit, because you will be bounced out. You can apply for building permit, but the first thing that's going to be requested is a set of pretty detailed documentation of this structure. And the Planning Commission hasn't seen it. My assumption is it hasn't been prepared, and that's all part of the process. So the very first thing is the very least, the zoning officer has to see maybe not a complete set of documents, but a pretty detailed set of documents. The best thing to do is to speak to the zoning officer and see what can be developed from that point. I think as far as requesting approval that the state store remain, that's something Borough Council can approve, but approval to pick up a building permit, I think you said it yourself.
What
She'll
does
say no
Borough
to
have,
everybody.
council have to do with approving whether or not the state store stays or not?
No.
If we agree that there can be a retail outlet there selling X, we don't have to opine on whether or not we want it to be the state store or not. I mean, that's Alan's issue in terms of who he's going to put in there. I mean, we don't have to approve the state store staying here.
I think,
Have to, but I think, and I don't want to speak for him, I think he's asking if the borough has an interest in the state store remaining. Correct?
What's that got to do
Yeah.
with pulling a building permit?
I think I had some questions, and actually Warren answered one of them in his recitation of the situation, and one was, what does the Planning Commission think of this, and have they seen detailed drawings? And I guess the answer is no. And I guess, getting back to Perry's original question, what does Mr. Smith want tonight? And I don't see we're in a position to give him anything tonight unless it is a feeling of council about the plan and the plan to keep the state store in town. But that's much more conceptual than, kind of like what we did back in September when you came with Mr. Hellier and we said we liked your plan. I like the plan. I like keeping the state store in town. But I don't know, without seeing the drawings and without going through the process the way normally you do with land development, that we can give much more than that, unless I'm wrong.
Let me suggest that I think the issue and the what I'll call the prospective applicant will correct me if I'm wrong, is that this, as it's currently sitting, is part of a larger project. And in order for the state store location, the new state store location, to advance before the rest of the project, then it would have to be treated, it essentially has to be carved out in an initial phase one and treated as a standalone. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
So I think what's being asked, notwithstanding the absence of the plans ready to be filed, is two things. The first is, as you say, Gerard, a sentiment that council is of a mind to want to keep the state store. But second, to agree with a phased approach that would let this be carved out and essentially move forward before the rest of the project. And I think that's the procedural issue which follows if we say, yes, we're committed to keeping it here. Then it's carved out, it's a standalone application before the rest of the project, and it goes forward with the good office of our zoning officer to assist on it. But we're essentially saying we're going to agree to it being carved out, and we're going to treat it as a separate application going forward, understanding there's a time frame here which is pretty ambitious, pretty challenging, of November of this year to be open.
Yeah, and I think you can almost see that if I go out to John Brown tomorrow and say I want to build a single building, and I hold this up, you know, it's going to be, well, wait a minute, you've got to design the whole thing first. And that we just won't meet any deadlines. I mean, this whole project's 2-3 years out to get the whole thing finished. So to meet a deadline for one tenant, which we see as an anchor, we don't have that luxury of time. So that's what we're trying to get from the borough, is to be able to do that cutout and have the support so that we can, again, keep the state store in the town.